morning, and welcome to the Washington Gubernatorial debates with Jay Inslee and Bill Bryant. I'm Molly Shen from Como News, along with my colleagues Natalie Brandt from King 5 News and Monique Minglavin from Cairo 7 News. We come to you tonight from Piggott Hall on the campus of Seattle University, and we're being seen across the state on more than 50 media outlets.
We would like to thank the Seattle CityClub, who founded the Washington State Debate Coalition this year to enhance Washington's access to informative, nonpartisan political debates. Tonight's debate is made possible by the financial support of lead sponsors, AARP, Washington State, and Microsoft. Supporting sponsors, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, as well as individual donors to Seattle CityClub's Empowered Voters campaign.
Now, the audience here and across the state can participate in this debate with the hashtag WAELEX, that is WAELEX. And later we will be asking you to pick a topic for our candidates through our friends at Microsoft Pulse at the web address wadebates.org. Now we'd like to introduce our candidates. Republican Bill Bryant and Democrat Jay Inslee. They have both been briefed on the rules, and we will begin with opening statements. Mr. Bryant won the pre-debate coin toss and will begin.
Thank you. And thank you, Seattle University, for hosting this debate. As a graduate of a Jesuit college, I share your commitment to social justice and to public service. In fact, it's because of a Jesuit priest that I'm actually even here tonight. He was a dear friend, and before he died, he said, "Bill, at the end of your life, all the stuff you've been able to buy won't matter." He said, at the end of your days, the only thing that's going to matter are the lives you've touched and the community you've built. This election is about community. It's about education, homelessness, traffic, and taxes. Education is why I'm running. I went to school on the Skokomish Reservation, and I want to make sure that every one of those kids and every kid all across Washington State gets an education that gives them a chance to succeed in life. 4 years ago, Governor Inslee promised an education plan, no excuses. 4 years later, we still have no education plan. He's failed. Jay Inslee has also failed at running the state agencies that care for the most vulnerable in our midst. Our foster care system is a mess. Homelessness is skyrocketing. And it's because of his mismanagement of our state mental hospitals and prisons that patients have died, that felons, rapists, and murderers have escaped, and the sexual offenders and felons have been released early. It's because of his bungling of the Department of Transportation that we are all stuck in traffic, emitting carbon. Look, to fix education, homelessness, traffic, requires making government better, not bigger. 4 years ago, Governor Inslee promised to do that. He promised to veto any tax increase. And then once he got into office, he broke that promise. He broke that promise and promoted over $1 billion in new taxes. You don't build a community on incompetence and broken promises. As your governor, I look forward to building community and to competently running this state government, and I look forward tonight to talking with you about how I intend to do that.
Thank you. Now, Governor Inslee.
Thank you. Thanks to the coalition. Thanks to everybody involved. I want to thank Trudy, who I met 50 years ago this month, for this long journey, and thank you for your leadership on the youth homelessness bill. Joe, thanks for being here tonight. You've come a long way since I raised you in the alfalfa fields of the Yakima Valley. You're doing okay. It has been an honor to wake up every single morning the last 4 years dedicated to helping Washingtonians realize their dreams. We are a confident and an optimistic state, and I am a confident and an optimistic governor, and there is good reason for that. We have made large, significant strides in education, big investments in early child education. I am proud that as governor, for the first time, every single child is going to have access to full-day kindergarten. I'm glad that we have better mentoring and better paid teachers. I'm glad we had Republicans and Democrats work together to pass tuition cuts, and I'm the only governor in the country who can say we've cut tuition for every single student in a public school. We made big strides in our economy. Look, we have created 250,000 jobs since I've been governor. Small businesses have the most rapid job creation of any state in the United States. unemployment is down in every county. Business Insider magazine says we have the #1 economy in the whole United States. And our transportation, which needs injection of infrastructure, has gotten it while I'm governor. We know how tough traffic is, and we need to do something about it. So I'm glad we passed the largest transportation package in the history of the state. So I will be offering a can-do, optimistic, positive vision for the state. Bill tonight will be offering a negative, can't-do approach to the next 4 years. I'm confident the approach that is based on our belief in ourselves and our future will prevail, and I look forward to this discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor.
Gentlemen, as you know, our community suffered a terrible tragedy on Friday night when a gunman killed 5 people who were either just shopping or working at the mall. I'd like to call it an unthinkable tragedy, but unfortunately it's not the first time it's happened. So from the Cascade Mall to Seattle Pacific University, from Marysville to Mukilteo, is this an issue of mental health policy? Is it gun control? Or is it something else? And how would you, as governor, prioritize the solution? And Governor Inslee, will begin with you.
Thank you. The first thing we should say is that in the face of this scourge of gun violence, passivity is unacceptable. Inaction is unacceptable. We cannot give ourselves up to thinking this is a status quo and we're just going to accept it. We have to act. And we'd have to act on multiple ways. We've got to do common sense gun safety measures. That's why I'm supporting the gun safety measure that will give families protection against extreme risk. It's on the ballot this year. It allows families to protect themselves if they have a psychotic son, to keep guns away from them. It's because we got to move forward, in my view, to have responsibilities so that people can secure their guns and not let criminals get access to those guns. I'm proud to be supported by the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. Bill is supported by the largest gun lobby in the state. We have different views on this. I just don't think that anyone needs high-capacity weapons of war on our street. And we need to improve the mental health capability of our state. And we are doing that. Unfortunately, the mental health system of our state was gutted before I was governor during the recession, absolutely hollowed out. And we have been building that back so that our kids, our husbands, our wives can get the mental health that they deserve. And this is something I think can help gun violence as well. Now, there's things we can do in our schools as well. I was at a early childhood education in Spokane last week. They were teaching kids how to deal with conflict. Now, there's a novel concept, and we got to do more of that in our schools.
Governor, thank you. Mr. Bryant, the same question.
This senseless gun violence has got to stop. Now, I support the Second Amendment. I own a gun, and I support responsible gun ownership. That's why I don't have a problem with background checks or waiting periods, and why the governor and I agree that a family member ought to be able to petition a judge to take firearms away from a mentally ill brother or sister or child. But let's step back and talk about what we're trying to accomplish here. And I think what we're trying to accomplish is, I know what we want to accomplish, is to reduce gun violence in Washington state. And 80% of our gun violence in Washington state is suicide. And then an additional amount is from people who have mental illness. And so there's no way we're going to end this senseless gun violence unless we fix our mental health system. And under Governor Inslee, our mental health system is in shambles. He will blame his predecessor. He will blame the recession. But Governor, you have had 4 years to fix it, and you haven't. What will I do? Well, first of all, we've got to fix Western State Hospital, which is a mess. And we need to go in there and ensure that Western and Eastern State are providing the backbone for our mental health system. But we also have to build up regional capacity, so we're not just reliant on our 2 state mental hospitals. And we need to build up regional capacity so that people can get services in their own community. That was presented to the governor's desk. Governor Inslee vetoed it. We also need to ensure that we are combining primary and mental health care so that if somebody comes into an emergency room who has a mental problem, we can deal with that mental issue as well. Those are 3 things, as governor, I will do to help reduce this senseless violence in Washington state.
Thank you.
Our next topic is education. As you both know, the state Supreme Court ruled in 2012 that Washington is violating the state constitution for not fully funding K-12 education, the paramount duty of the state. In August of last year, the court ruled that the state was in contempt for not making enough progress in completing a plan to get the job done. We're still in contempt, still receiving fines of $100,000 a day. So lay out your plan for how to solve the McCleary funding issue that's expected to cost billions more dollars, and tell us how it will be different from your opponent's plan. We'll start with Mr. Bryant.
Well, it's entirely impossible to tell you how my plan would be different from my opponent's plan, because he promised us a plan 4 years ago, but we still don't have one. Actually, in the gubernatorial debates 4 years ago, Rob McKenna had a plan. Jay Inslee took out TV ads attacking Rob McKenna's plan, even though he had no plan of his own. But he promised one in 2013. But in 2013, there was no plan. In 2014, there was no plan. In 2015, he vowed action in 2016. But in 2016, all he did was sign a bill organizing a committee to work on it before 2017. That committee has met 5 times. How many meetings have you made, Governor? Half of one. He has no plan. He has failed at the state's paramount responsibility, and that means he's a failed governor. Here's what I'm doing. Over the course of this campaign, I've been working with education reformers and with legislators, and we're putting together a plan that will equitably fund education for every child. Right now, we're spending about $12,000 per student, which is above the national average. But not every kid's getting $12,000. Kids in rich school districts might even be getting more than $12,000. Kids in poor school districts are getting less. The first thing we need to do in order to comply with McCleary is ensure that we are providing every kid with an equal chance to get ahead. Secondly, we need to amply fund education. And that means in my administration, over the course of 4 years, I want to move up to where we're spending 50 to 51% of our budget on education. And finally, we need to provide some reforms on how we're spending the money. So we're providing opportunities for kids who don't choose to go on to college.
Governor Inslee.
Well, this is highest priority. It's how I got involved in public service. Trudy and I passed a school bond over in Seattle, Washington. This is something I've been working on for decades. And I'm very, very proud of the achievements of the state of Washington in the last 4 years. We just didn't have a plan. We had reality. And reality is important here. Here's the reality. While I've been governor, we have invested $5.5 billion, new dollars, in the education of our children. That's not a plan. That's progress. $2.2 billion of that goes directly to the McCleary decision. And look what we've got for this. This isn't just about fiscal decisions. We have to look at improving the education of our children, not just satisfying the Supreme Court decision. So look what we've done with smart investments. One of the largest investments of early childhood education. I'm delighted that 3- and 4-year-old kids are learning how to deal with one another so they're not a problem in kindergarten, 1st grade. I'm delighted that it doesn't matter where you live in the state of Washington, you're going to have access to full-day kindergarten. I'll tell you why. Because poverty should not be destiny. I'm delighted that we're reducing class sizes. I'm delighted that we're finally giving a pay increase to teachers fought voraciously by the Republicans. They must have been abused as a 1st grader or something by a teacher. I don't understand that. But we succeeded in that. We succeeded in that. And now that's why we should be confident to move forward. Now here's where we disagree. I believe in actually doing this. Bill won't even close the loophole for the oil and gas industry to put into early child education in kindergarten and 1st grade. We need to actually put meat on the bone, and meat's going on the bone in our schools, and I'm happy to have fought this battle.
Time's up. Now, you've both told me in past interviews that you're against a state income tax. Is that still the case? If so, can I get a pledge from both of you on stage tonight? Governor Inslee.
I am against the state income tax. I do not believe it is right for the state of Washington. I've had that position since 1989 when I first ran for the legislature. I represented the Yakima 14th District for 4 years in the State House. That was my position. I was in the U.S. Congress, both from the 4th District and the 1st Congressional District, and I'm governor. I do not believe it's right for the state of Washington.
Mr. Bryant.
Well, 4 years ago, Governor Inslee said he would veto any tax increase. And then once he got elected, he proposed over $1 billion in new taxes. A tax on bottled water, a tax on beer.
I'm asking you about a pledge.
I'm going to get there.
Eventually.
And I will tell you, So I am very confused by the governor's response. I will tell you that I am opposed to any income tax, any new tax on income. But Governor, we can end this tonight. Will you look in that camera and will you tell the people of Washington State?
There's no talking directly to Governor Inslee during.
So I would like Governor Inslee to look into the camera and promise to the people of Washington State that he will veto any new tax on any income. Will you veto any new tax on income? I will.
Debate rules that were agreed upon. You cannot speak directly.
I was looking at the camera.
I do have a follow-up for you then. If state income tax is off the table, then how do we fund the education funding crisis in this state? What is on the table?
That's great. Thank you so much. Because I did say that I want to ramp up our education spending on the full continuum of education, from early learning all the way to higher ed. And I want that to get up to about 51% of our budget. So how are we going to do it? Well, right now it's about 48-49. And I think we can actually increase the amount that we're dedicating to revenue, or the amount of revenue we're dedicating to education over the next few years by dedicating revenue growth to education. That's got to be a priority. This is the paramount responsibility of the state. Now, I'll also tell you what else we need to do. We need to scrutinize how we're currently spending money in the budget. Right now, we have got a situation where we haven't really scrutinized this budget in over 30 years. And I want to look at every program, every agency, and every tax incentive. And if it's not moving us forward, we're going to fix it or eliminate it.
Time is up. I'll ask you the same question.
Yes, well, I think the important thing about this is not a hypothetical where we have to wonder what at least one of the candidates will do, because we've seen what he's done. He's put the growth of our economy, which has been robust. We have the most vibrant economy, and it's increased revenues to the state, and we have channeled that into education. Now, again, I want to make this clear. This was $5.5 billion. This is the largest increase in education investment in the history of the state of Washington. I'm proud of that because we used it smartly. But there might be a couple other things we got to do. Look, there's some corporations that have loopholes that weren't even meant for them. They really weren't. The oil and gas industry uses one for $65 million when that should be going to the education of our kids. Bill opposes to closing that. We got to make some common sense measures in that regard. Because I'll tell you what, here's the consequences of what Bill is telling you. It means you're going to take money out of mental health or out of housing programs and put them in education. We can't do that. It's hard enough. You can't do homework if you don't have housing, a home to live in. So the plan that Bill has won't work.
Now, just to clarify, the rules that you both agreed to before this debate was that you would not ask questions or address one another directly, just to clarify that.
Thank you.
Now, moving along to one of the complaints that we hear consistently and loudly from people all throughout our area is really about traffic and congestion. And quite frankly, people are angry about it. It takes them away from their families. It makes them sacrifice their time just to get around. So can you both tell me, please, what new would you do in this 4-year term? What new would you do in this 4-year term to reduce congestion? Governor Inslee.
Well, first I would do is to stop people from rolling back the transportation infrastructure decisions we've made. And that's a real threat. I think people don't understand this. Once you actually pass something, if the other party or the other governor comes into place, frequently they try to roll back what you've done. So the first thing I would do is to make sure we continue the investments that we made on this large infrastructure package. 200,000 people are going to go to work. North-South Freeway in Spokane going to be done. 520 Bridge going to be done. 167 in Pierce County going to be done. Snoqualmie Pass is going to be widened under the leadership that I provided. And that took some time because, frankly, some of the folks balked in the legislature for doing that. And they still may want to try to repeal that. But this is too important to the economy to allow that to happen. Now, what we need to go forward is we've got to continue, in my view, providing Washingtonians more access to more options for transportation. I'm supporting the ST3 project so we can continue to build light rail. Look, light rail can move 16,000 cars an hour per mile. You build another lane, you only move 2,000. This is a cost-effective thing that we can do to decrease congestion, and I wish it could be done tomorrow. But we got to get moving to continue to build this. And I'm glad I was the governor who was diligent and resourceful and made some really hard compromises to get this transportation done. Our people deserve it. They're mad. I understand that.
Mr. Bryant.
Fixing our traffic mess is going to be my #1 priority for the Washington State Department of Transportation. I drive in it. I get it. And as governor, I really want to fix it. Governor Inslee brags about how he passed this historic transportation package, but let me tell you, in the last months of Governor Gregoire's administration, she pulled about 20 of us together to put together a transportation outline for either Mr. McKenna or Mr. Inslee, whoever was elected. That package was really pretty much ready to go. We would have had to twist some arms to get some votes. But Governor Inslee came in and introduced a hyper-partisan style to Olympia, and he blew it up. And it took many of us 3 years to put that back together again. And Governor, we passed that in spite of you, not because of you. Now, what am I going to do to continue to build upon that package? Well, the first thing we've got to do is we've got to focus on more local solutions. I have engineers at the Department of Transportation, former engineers will meet with me. The current engineers want to meet at a very dark Denny's far away from downtown Olympia. But they will tell me we have ideas on how we can reduce traffic congestion. We just really haven't been tasked with that. Well, I'm going to task them with that. And it means adding a lane in some difficult parts of road, or reconfiguring an on-ramp or an on-ramp or an off-ramp. We can engineer, not socially engineer, people to get to work on time and be able to get home to see their families at night. We also need to invest in public transit that people use because it works. And that means it takes them from where they live to where they work and gets them home in a safe and a reliable time frame.
Mr. Bryant, when you say that, the mass transit, are you saying that you're against ST3?
I will tell you, when I joined this group by Governor Gregoire, I was the freight guy, and so I didn't really know a whole lot about public transit. But within one meeting, I realized you can't have a transportation system that meets the needs of the freight community unless you have a public transit system that works. And so I developed 4 criteria on whether or not I want to invest in a transit system. And the first is, does it move people from where they live to where they work, and is it flexible to accommodate changes in where they live and work over the coming years? The second is, how much does it cost per passenger per mile? The third is, are we moving people out of cars and onto public transit, or are we moving them from one mode of public transit onto another mode of public transit? And the fourth criteria is, can we deliver it in 6 to 10 years? And by every measure, ST3 fails. I support public transit. I want us to take a time out, reevaluate how we're about to spend $50 billion so that we ensure we have a public transit system that meets the needs for us now and for future generations.
Governor, my follow-up for you on transportation. We talked to traffic experts who said ST3 will certainly help move people, but as our area is growing, it won't take cars off the road. It will just prevent more from getting on the road. Yeah, so what do you say for those cars that are still on the road?
Well, this is not the only thing we're going to do in transportation. It's not the only thing we're going to do. The things Bill talked about, we're doing. Look, I was really happy, I don't know if you noticed or not, but a few weeks ago I was at 405, where I was really happy that because we brought some efficiencies, we were able to build an extra lane on 405 from Bellevue to Linwood by doing what's called shoulder hardening. I was happy to be able to expedite that kind of thing. I was happy to know that ST3 isn't just light rail. It has express bus service. Look, express bus service is loved by people. It's very effective, and that's included in this package. Now, Bill's transportation views are a little kind of uncertain. You know, before I was governor, he publicly said he was sort of the #1 advocate for tolling. And he sort of said he was the father of the Bertha Project. And yet for the last year, I've heard him criticizing me about the things that he wanted to create. So his positions on this may change. I'm for building infrastructure. I'm for this state moving forward. And I'll tell you why. We're going to grow. We're going to grow. 65,000 people are moving here because we've got a hot economy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, 2 weeks ago today, a 19-year-old man was killed when a car on I-5 left the road and hit his tent. Mr. Bryant, you've said that you would give local law enforcement the authority to remove homeless camps from state land. Many people feel this is a state responsibility, so aren't you just shifting that to the local level? And what do you believe the governor's role is in addressing homelessness?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it, because this is an issue which is very personal. Before I ran for office, I volunteered here in Seattle at a homeless shelter for men. I was a volunteer night manager. And I learned a great deal about the different causes of homelessness and why different people are homeless. And I volunteered because I really believe that we measure our society and our community by how we treat the most vulnerable in our midst. And I don't think relegating some of the most vulnerable in our midst to the margins of society by enabling them to live in tents, I don't think that's progressive. I think it's cruel. We need to come up with homeless programs that deal with the different reasons people are homeless. And as someone who worked in a shelter, I'm fully aware there are a lot of different reasons. The reasons a veteran is homeless, and there should be no homeless veterans, is very different than the reason why a mom with kids is homeless, or why a 20-year-old who has a home to go to, but who's a heroin addict and living in a tent. We need to not just give local law enforcement the authority to clean out these camps, which I think we do, but as a state, and the role of the governor is to pull together mayors and city council members and law enforcement and homeless advocates and come up with a statewide plan so we're not moving the program around, but we actually lift up and help those who are most vulnerable. Governor Inslee will talk about how he has doubled the amount of money spent on homelessness, but we have nothing to show for it. I will measure my compassion by how many people we lift off the streets, not by how much money we're spending.
Governor Inslee, your campaign says you have secured $240 million for homelessness during your first term. The one-night count this year showed a 19% increase in the number of people living on the streets in King County, and we know it is not just a problem in King County, it is across the state. Why isn't that money translating into a smaller homeless population, and what would you do in a second term?
Look, Trudy and I have been active in this in some time. These are people who, if they get services and reasonable housing, can go back to their families and go back to work. Here's what we're facing. We have people with mental health problems. We have people with addiction problems. But here's something that's really hit us hard in the last 2 years. We have a huge increase in the economy. So 65,000 people are moving in Washington State. Guess what? They're driving the rents up. And your 19% figure is amazing, because when the rents go up $100 a month, homelessness goes up 18%. So the fact of the matter is we have to produce more low-income housing, and we are doing it. Look, this comes back to this issue. I just don't have a plan. We have action. We've put 2,700 more low-income units online since I've been governor. We've saved 4,000 that were otherwise we're going to go into high-income areas. We are leading the country in rapid rehousing. The country are looking to us. They're going to replicate our rapid rehousing that gets homeless people back into permanent housing quicker. We have had 1,400 veterans get permanent housing, and there were 1,400 veterans homeless when I started. But we have now more veterans homeless because rents have been going through the roof. And I'm glad you pointed it out. This is not just a Seattle problem. And we have passed the Youth Homelessness Act so that we can focus and prioritize our assets on our kids so that they have a place to do homework. And I want to thank Trudy for her leadership on that.
Thank you. Mr. Bryant, I wanted to follow up with you and clarify. It sounds like, as a state leader, you're talking about bringing mayors together. I want to know if you do think that the homeless problem is addressed primarily at the local level, and if there's anything specific you can do at the state level other than help people talk about it.
No, that's a good question. There is. And I'll tell you, during the beginning of this campaign, I wasn't sure there was. I thought it might be a municipal issue. But as I've moved around this state, I'm realizing this is an issue that mayors all across Washington state are having to deal with. Mayors who have never had to deal with homelessness before, in Auburn, in Federal Way, in Puyallup, in Wenatchee, in Walla Walla, in Vancouver, in Spokane. So if we don't have a governor who will step up and take some leadership on this issue, we're simply going to be moving the problem around. And I'll tell you, while it might be in some cases because rents have gone up, fundamentally, if you have homeless people, we most often have mental health issues or drug addiction issues that need to be dealt with. So in addition to providing low-income housing, we have got to repair a mental health system that under Governor Inslee is in shambles.
And yeah, Governor Inslee, I'd actually like you to. I wanted to ask you about that. You mentioned mental health as well.
If we're going to succeed in acting together in a comprehensive way, we do have to have people who fundamentally understand this problem. And I'm concerned because Bill demonstrated really woeful ignorance about this subject last week, and I'll tell you why. 50% of our funds that goes to help homeless people and goes to the communities, so we can build community response, which I totally agree we should do. 50% of it comes from a dedicated fund. It's called the recording fee. You record a document, we pay $40, it goes into homelessness. The Republicans last year tried to kill that and zero that out. They wanted to stop that, cut off 50%. When Bill was asked about that, he didn't even know where this money came from. And unfortunately, even now, has not said that he would maintain this source of funding. Maybe it's this zero-based budgeting that he's talking about. We got to keep our funding going for homelessness. I'm committed to that. We got to make this work.
Thank you.
May I respond?
I think we're out of time on this topic.
Well, okay, but I think my position's been misrepresented, but maybe we'll come back to it later.
I actually think it was totally accurate, and I'm happy. You can go onto my Twitter. They'll be tweeting about this right now.
Oh, I'm sure your team is tweeting about it all over the place.
You may use time for the next question to respond if you feel it's appropriate. Related issue, special task force convened to address the region's heroin epidemic has proposed opening public supervised sites where addicts can use under medical supervision with the goal of reducing overdoses and safety risks. Two-part question. Number one, do you support this proposal? If so, if it's successful in Seattle-King County, would you support expanding it in the state? Or if you oppose the proposal, what is an alternative idea to address the heroin epidemic? And we will start with Governor Inslee.
I'm going to have to research this more before giving a particular opinion on it. I would like to look at its success or failure in other jurisdictions before I express an opinion about it. I think it's worthy of consideration, and I'm going to be talking to experts in the field to see whether it has merit. So what do? We need to do quite a number of things. Number one, we have to make sure we continue the access to health care, which helps in primary care particularly prevent addictive behavior. And I'm proud to have been a team that has committed and actually pulled off health care reform. 750,000 people in our state have access to primary care that can help treat and prevent addictive behavior. And I'm glad that the Republicans have not been able, despite 43 efforts, to repeal that. We got to keep that health care for these people to prevent addiction. Number two, we've got to continue our efforts to reduce the overprescription of opioids. And this has been a real problem. People go in for knee surgery, become addicted, end up on heroin. We just take strong action against the license of a physician who essentially was a pill factory, and that is a source of a significant part of this increased addictive behavior. Third, we obviously want to arm our police and our schools and other places with the emergency medication that can save you immediately with immediate injection. And yes, we've got to build up a mental health care system that was gutted during the recession. And we got a lot of work to do that, and I'm looking forward to continuing our improvement of that.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Bryant.
Not too many weeks ago, I sat with some parents in Des Moines. These are parents of 20-year-olds, maybe kids in between 18 and 24, except their kids aren't at home. These are all parents who have kids who are living in tents on the streets somewhere in Seattle. They don't know where. It's a nightmare for these parents. And they know that their kids are addicted to heroin. And they're just bracing themselves for that phone call. And what they said to me is, Bill, please do not give my kid a free, safe place to shoot up. He said, you're only going to be enabling them. Now, I understand that pain, and I understand how those parents want that child to come home, and they want to help that child. And I think all of us do. And so I am very reluctant to enable a felony on municipal property. But I also am looking at some of the data that's coming out of other places. And, well, I'm not yet persuaded. I'll keep looking at it. But I'm gonna be a tough sell. I'll tell you what we do need to do is merge primary and behavioral care in non-emergency room settings so that we can get people the mental health care they need and the drug addiction services they need when they're ready for detox and drug addiction. We can't have somebody come in and say, I'm ready, and then give them a slip saying, we'll come back in 30 or 40 days. That's not working. And so we need a governor who will work with mayors and city council people to come up with a coordinated approach on how we can deal with the drug addiction that we have in our streets.
Thank you.
Maybe this will give us some insight into the person behind the politics for you both. With the proliferation of social media and smartphones, more than ever, whether they are pictures or video clips, images represent the people, the events, the issues that really affect and impact our lives. So my question for you is, what image from this last year has had a big impact on you and why? Mr. Bryant.
That's an excellent question. I'll tell you, one of the weird things about running for governor is you end up having a cell phone with thousands of photos of yourself on it because people are taking pictures of you or you're having your staff take pictures of you, and that's not what I'm very moved by. I think what I have been moved by are photos of kids at the schools I visited. I visited a charter school over in Spokane, and it was a kindergarten class, and the principal told me that when these kids arrived a few weeks before, I was in the end of September, these kids had arrived in the middle of August, he said all but maybe 15% were reading at or below a kindergarten level with early vocabulary, pre-alphabet or alphabet skills and that type of thing, were at or below a kindergarten level. But by the time I got there, these kids were all working on little computers and had their headsets, and I've got some photos of that. And within 6 weeks, all but 4% were at or above a grade level. Last week, I went to visit the school that I went to on the Skokomish Reservation between kindergarten and 7th grade and met kids and participated in a music class where they were all doing different drills on drums, and we have some wonderful photos, exciting photos of those kids getting excited about a music program. I think that the photos that really touch me are those photos of kids at schools I visited over the last year.
Thank you. Governor Inslee.
Well, I know I should give a politically sophisticated answer to this during a debate, but the first image that came to mind is Chase Inslee, the 2-year-old, sitting in our dining room, totally spaced out on a blackberry milkshake. And he was so happy and rapturous, that image sticks with me. So I'm giving you just a totally honest answer to your question. I do want to just talk about what Bill said, though, because I have experienced the joy of seeing people's eyes light up when at Rainier Beach High School, when a 14-year-old has access to computers for the first time. This woman told me she's now in a committed relationship with computers. Okay, to see a 4-year-old at Mountain View Elementary School. I grew up mostly in White Center. I went to Mountain View Elementary School, and to see these dual language kids learning, the English speakers are learning Spanish, and the Spanish speakers are learning English at the same time. And then you go to the next door class, and they're learning the social emotional learning I told you about, how you deal with each other. The kind of thing or those beautiful pictures are happening in large part because I have been successful making the investments to give these educators an opportunity and these kids an opportunity. And I guess I must resist Bill's idea that we should fire the governor who has brought so much early education and so much special training and so much career technical education and so much STEM education to our state. I'd rather keep that progress going.
Thank you.
All right. Now, before we move to audience questions, I'd like to remind you of 2 ways you can participate in this process tonight. Use the hashtag WAElects if you would like to comment and see what other people are saying online tonight. You can also help choose the next topic by going to wadebates.org. You'll be choosing from climate change, health, and transportation. We'll ask about whatever you choose after the audience questions. First, though, it is to our first audience member with a question. Michael Coe has a question for Mr. Bryant.
Hi, Mr. Bryant. My question is, what is your plan for dealing with the ongoing tensions and increasing distrust between police and communities of color?
Between police and people of color?
Yes, and communities of color.
I think this is an issue that is even larger than the particular issue mentioned. We have too much right now in our country, a culture of fear and a lack of trust. And it goes back to trying to build community. We have got to ensure that we have communities who trust our law enforcement officers and who actually see them as partners. And right now we don't. And as long as that's the case, our law enforcement system is going to be broken. Our criminal justice system will be broken. We need to ensure that police are trained in a way that they are culturally sensitive to all of the communities that they're serving, that they have community outreach programs so that they're working in the communities that they need to protect and serve. And I think in many of our cities in Washington State, unlike in other parts of the country, our police are taking steps. They're not perfect, and we have a ways to go. But they are trying to reach out and serve the communities that are around them and their precinct. And I think that's exactly what we need to encourage. As a governor, you can set a tone. You can make it clear that racism and bigotry is not accepted in politics or in our police force. And I would bet you most of the people in our police force would agree with that.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Governor Inslee.
Will I be answering that question?
A similar question.
I see.
It was a struggle this year to get legislative funding to train more police at the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Academy. Do you believe that our state does offer enough police training and the right police training for reform?
I think the first thing we need to realize in the discussion of racial relations in total in our state is that even though we've come a long way since I was 11, when Martin Luther King talked about going to the mountaintop, we have, but we are a long ways from the mountaintop. And I think the first thing to realize is we've all got work to do. So I've been doing a lot of work, giving cultural competency training, working hard in diversity in our appointments. We're making progress on that. But when it comes to training police, we are really fortunate. We have one of, if not the best, criminal justice training centers in the country. The country's really coming to us to see how SURAR is doing this, to help officers learn the science and art of disengagement and de-escalation so that it can prevent violent situations from occurring. But we do not have capability to finance all of the officers being given that very important in training. And we have to find a way to finance that. And I've been talking to local law officials. By the way, I'm pleased that every single law enforcement organization that has done an endorsement has endorsed my candidacy. And I'm proud of that because I think these officers understand the importance of this training. But I want to come back to a central concern here. We're going to have to generate some dollars to increase the funding to give these officers this important training. But my opponent's proposition on education is we'll just kind of starve all these other budgets and put money in education. We can't do that. We got multiple obligations for our citizens, and this is a very, very important one. Now, there's also issues of accountability we got to deal with.
Thank you.
Our next audience question is from Professor Roshnek Roshendal.
Governor Inslee, what have you done to encourage young women to pursue education in STEM fields such as computer science and to encourage employers in the region to work toward more female representation in the high-tech industry?
Well, I point out that two of my sons are the luckiest guys in the world, one who married a forensic scientist and married another brilliant young woman. But on a more serious answer, this is really important for both personal growth and economic performance. Our economy, our ability to cure cancer will be rapidly escalated when we get young women to go into math and chemistry and biology and physics just at the same percentage rate as young men. And that's not happening today. So we've got to make sure we give these young women, to start with, role models to get them to understand what they can be if they go into these STEM fields of math and physics and chemistry. That's why I'm really excited about the fact that we're leading the country in giving young people pre-apprenticeship programs. We've started two programs, one called Core Plus, one called YouthWorks. And this gives young women and men some pre-apprenticeship opportunities so they can go into a hospital, they can go into a cancer research ward and see in their own minds, what we can do. I've been working on this for some time. I had a thing called Scoop on Cool Careers. We'd hold it once a year at Microsoft. We'd bring in young women, and then we bring in astronauts and physicists to give them that kind of mentoring relationship. And we know the women are more than smart enough to do all this work. We just got to get people to have confidence and a vision for their future. Now, we got to increase coding in our schools as well, and we are working on that.
Governor, thank you. Mr. Bryant, similar question. In 2013, women in Washington earned around 78 cents on the dollar compared to their male counterparts. Women of color earned even less. So if elected, what would you do to close the wage gap?
Well, the wage gap between men and women of equal experience is unacceptable. My sister works as a bank manager. My other sister is a principal. My other sister works for the Archdiocese, and my wife has a professional career in her own right. And if I ever thought that they were being paid less than a man who was doing exactly the same job, I would be furious. We should have no tolerance for sexual discrimination in the workplace in terms of pay. So how do we address that? Well, I think one of the things we need to do, and the governor mentioned it, is we need to make sure that we're addressing the achievement gap, not just between Caucasians and Asians and Latinos and African Americans, and that gap is huge, particularly in Seattle, but all across Washington State. But also, we need to encourage young girls to go into science, technology, engineering, and math. I visited Delta High School over in Pasco and talked to a lot of young ladies who were interested in going into science and technology careers, and they were excited about the programs that they were experiencing. Down at the Clark County Skills Center, I sat with a bunch of young ladies and young men who were really working together on a robotics project. And some of the kids in that class wanted to go on and be engineers, and they wanted to go on to college and get a degree. But a lot of the other ones were saying, you know what, I don't want to go to college. That's not for me. But I'm interested in this class because I want to learn with my hands and actually figure out how we put this together. And you had young men and women working together to begin to figure out how they could move forward with their careers in different ways. Encouraging young ladies to do it early on will also help us achieve more equity later in the workplace.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Linda Najat of Bellevue has a question for Governor Inslee.
1 in 7 households in Washington state is at risk of hunger. 70% of those households are employed. What would you say to a working single mom who doesn't have the resources to put food on the table for her children tonight?
Well, this is a serious issue. How can a child who's hungry concentrate on a math test? We know what that means in the lives of these children. And people blame our schools for a lot of the opportunity gap, but when children show up on the doorstep with no coat on a winter's day, no food in their belly, and they're sleeping in the back of a 68 Buick, we have to provide these children wraparound services so they're ready for school. And this is a very important, this is an educational issue. That's why I'm very excited to tell you that I succeeded stymieing the effort that came out of the Republicans in D.C. who wanted to cut the SNAP program. SNAP program is a nutritional program for families, and they wanted to cut that. It would have been about $200,000. We fought back. We said, no, you're not going to take that money out of hungry kids, or take that food out of hungry kids' mouths, and we made sure that we restored that. And I'm proud of that victory. We've been a great advocate for breakfast after the bell. This is a tremendous program that makes sure all children are fed and ready for that class, and make sure that you got a nutritional program at the school. And this issue where we have talked about increasing, and we've succeeded in early child education, child care, we've done that too. But here's the most important thing we can do. We can get a minimum wage and paid sick leave in this state. So a young mother who's working hard and not earning a decent wage, she can get a living wage. And when she gets sick and she has the flu, she doesn't have to make a decision whether to lose her job or tend to her kid or herself. Now those are things I'm for. My opponent's against them both. I want to stand up for these kids and give them a shot in school.
Mr. Bryant, talking about the minimum wage, we know that you're against raising it to a statewide $13.50. So my question for you is, because you support individual communities setting their own minimum wage, what kind of metrics do you think they should use, or how do you think they should come at that number? And do you support raising the base minimum wage across the state of $9.47 right now?
I support raising the minimum wage in Washington state, particularly in communities where the cost of living has increased faster than inflation. And that's why, as a commissioner at the Port of Seattle, I voted to increase the minimum wage for certain jobs at SeaTac Airport to over $15 an hour by 2017. That made sense given those jobs and the cost of living in King County. My concern as I move all across the state is I realize we have different parts of our state with very different costs of living. And I'm concerned if we raise the minimum wage uniformly in a one-size-fits-all system, particularly in communities that have a lower cost of living, we could end up hurting the people we're trying to help. They could end up having their hours cut, or their benefits cut, or they could end up losing their jobs. Let's not do that. So let's step back. I've committed to working with the legislature in 2017 to come up with a minimum wage increase that will be based on the regional cost of living. If we do that, we can actually lift the people who are needing help rather than hurting those that we are trying to help. And I'm afraid Governor Inslee's approach, where we just take a one-size-fits-all system and apply it across the board and see what happens, I think that is playing poker blindfolded with other people's jobs, and the ante is other people's jobs, and I just don't think that's a responsible approach.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I got an answer whether you approve of raising the minimum.
Raising the minimum wage across the state in areas where the cost of living exceeds inflation, and I think that minimum wage increase should reflect the cost of living in that area.
So you think there are parts of the state where $9.47 an hour is sufficient?
You'll look at Spokane and you'll actually find out that $13.50 in Seattle is equivalent to about $9.50 in Spokane.
If I may answer that question, I assume I'll have an answer to it.
I'm sorry, you had the first question and
I'm sorry?
and he had the second, so I was just clarifying his answer there.
We're actually moving now to our Microsoft Pulse poll. So thank you to our audience members who asked questions. Many of you also voted in our Microsoft Pulse poll at waddebates.org, where the topics were climate change, health, and transportation. Our results are climate change, 40%, health, 21%, and transportation, 39%, which means it was close, but we're talking about climate change. So, Mr. Bryant, first, in a speech to the Evergreen Republican Women's Club last year, many perceived you as being dismissive of Seattle's public process and the environmental concerns of its voters. Environmentalists, in fact, say that you can't be trusted. So how do you respond to them?
Well, long before I ever ran for office, both Barbara and I were committed to a number of environmental causes and organizations all across Washington state. I am committed to ensuring that Puget Sound is cleaner when I die than it was when I was born. I'm a founder of the Nisqually River Foundation, which is an organization committed to protecting the Nisqually watershed from the glacier all the way to the delta. My wife and I have been very active in protecting the Methow Valley. These are part of what we believe is our obligation to the next generation, that we have to protect this environment that we all cherish and want to live in. And it's a part of who Barbara and I are. So I don't know why they wouldn't think that they could trust me, because I have a long-standing record. And at the Port of Seattle, I work to address climate change. We were the first airport to have a greenhouse gas emissions inventory so we could figure out where we were and whether we're raising or lowering our emissions. We electrified the ground feeder, transitioned it to natural gas. We invested in technology that allowed planes and cruise ships to plug into the electric grid. And I worked with Alaska Airlines, Washington State University, and Boeing with the Port of Seattle to pioneer the first commercial aviation biofuel. Those are tangible projects to ensure that we are reducing our carbon footprint. But what I do not want to do is sign up for one of Governor Inslee's taxes that could actually drive up the cost of heating fuel, that could drive up the cost of gasoline, that could possibly drive middle-class jobs out of Washington state for zero environmental impact. That is not only misguided. For a governor, that's malpractice.
Mr. Bryant, thank you. Governor Inslee, you pride yourself on your environmental record. There is a carbon tax on the ballot this year that you have not endorsed. Will you be endorsing that, or why not?
No, obviously this is an extreme threat to the state of Washington. I've looked in the eyes of a person who's seen their house burned down, and these forest fires are becoming cataclysmic. Puget Sound is becoming much more acidic because of carbon pollution. We need to act, but we do need to have something that meets our situation. 732, we had great people working on it, but unfortunately I have concerns about it because it would actually take money out of the general fund that we can put in schools. But we are doing really good things in defeating climate change in this state. I'm happy about it. Let me list those things. Number one, we for the first time are giving their grandchildren what they deserve. And they deserve a shot at a Washington state the way we had it when we grew up. So on a rule that was adopted by our Department of Ecology last week, we will provide our grandchildren for protection that will require the biggest polluters in the state to reduce their pollution of carbon dioxide, that this is this mortal threat to the state of Washington. It is a sophisticated rule. It is a fair rule. We have a clean energy fund that is help build research. We have a clean company development fund, which is building companies from iTech and Bellingham that makes solar panels to SGL and Moses Lake. We have clean energy all across the state. Now, I will explain why the environmental communities don't trust Bill. You ask him that question. Because he is a former federal lobbyist who has opposed virtually every single environmental protection that we've worked on in the last 4 years. Look, I think we need safety protection against oil trains. He says we shouldn't even have a
Governor
rule
Inslee,
against
thank
oil
you.
trains.
That's
We got to
not
keep
true.
this
You and I
work.
agree on oil trains.
I've heard you say you want a moratorium,
That's
Bill,
time, gentlemen.
and you will prevent us from taking care of oil trains. I'm dissatisfied with that.
It's time now for closing statements. To finish, any last thoughts, starting with you, Mr. Bryant.
Well, thank you. I think that whenever you have a governor who's up for re-election, the election is really a referendum on that governor. And the decision that all of us need to decide or make in this community over the next few weeks is whether or not Governor Inslee deserves to be re-elected. Has he run the government well? And let's run through some of the litany of issues that we have to think about while we're making that decision. First of all, we have a mental health system which is broken. He will blame his predecessors. He will blame the recession. But he's had 4 years to fix it. And it's creating real turmoil in communities and families. We need to fix this mental health system, and he has not done it. We have a situation where homelessness is exploding by 41% in King County alone, and yet we don't have any coordinated approach or any gubernatorial leadership. We have a Western State hospital that is a mess. Patients are dying. Staff is endangered. Dangerous patients have escaped. It's failed 4 federal audits, and the governor did nothing. He then withdrew secretly the accreditation. And then it had a scathing Department of Corrections report talking about the lax security at Western State Hospital, but that report was not even shared with the Legislative Oversight Committee. Is that how we want our governor to behave? We have the 4th worst traffic in America. It's keeping people from getting to work on time and home to see their families. We also have a situation where the institutions which should protect us are failing. Now, it's not enough to come up here and talk about how I believe he's failed to provide an education plan, or he's failed in our social and health services, or he's failed in making sure that our prisons work or that traffic runs. You also need to know what my vision is. And I think there are 6 priorities that I want to work on during the first term. We've got to work on fixing our education system. We've got to ensure that we address rural unemployment. We've got to have a prison system that works. We have to have a mental health system that works. We have to have a plan for salmon recovery.
Mr. Bryant, thank you. We're running out of time. Governor Inslee.
Thank you. Thank for everybody involved in this. When I started this discussion, I said that I would offer the state a confident and optimistic state, a confident and optimistic vision for the next 4 years. And that's exactly what we have. We have the ability to build on what we're building here, the most dynamic economy in the world, an economy that's curing cancer, an economy that is fixing a lot of the problems that did pre-existing. Look, I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm saying we got to fix problems. And we're fixing problems at mental health. We're fixing problems at DLC. But we're also fixing problems for families. Let me go back to this issue because I wasn't given this question, this minimum wage issue. Look, you can't live on $9.47 an hour in any city in this state. And Bill, when he was asked if he'd raise the unemployment rate, the floor that everybody would have to agree to, it was kind of trickery, but his answer was no. He does not support that. And you can't trust him on this. I'll tell you why. He gave us crocodile tears about families in poverty, but when he was at the port, when Seattle did raise their minimum wage, he joined a lawsuit to prevent that from going on. Look, we ought to have a statewide minimum wage. Regions or areas should be able to go above that if cities wants to, but he brought a lawsuit to stop that. He wants to stop sick leave, for goodness sakes. Somebody works at Denny's and they got the flu, they shouldn't have to go to work for a couple days. So we have big differences. We have differences on our ability to move forward on environmental protection. I want to do oil trains. He's asked for a moratorium not to do any safety on oil trains. I just don't understand that. He's endorsed by the anti-gun safety people. I'm on the other side. I'm supported by Planned Parenthood and NARAL because I have been standing for a woman's right of choice. I'm endorsed by Equal Rights for Washington because I have spent a long time in public life standing up for justice for all of us and who we are. And yes, we got to beat this demon of climate change, and then we got to keep doing what we're doing, which is being the best economy in the United States, and we're going to build a stronger economy and a better future for everyone in this state. Thank you very much. Hope I can earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Time went by quickly. Thanks to both of our candidates tonight. Thank you. Thank you. And we want to thank you also to our partner, Venue Seattle University, Tonight's debate is produced by the Washington State Debate Coalition and our sponsors, AARP.